I know it's always a big challenge, particularly after a great lunch, to stay focused and still be as active as particularly during the morning session. But I think we had a very good start with lots of interesting presentations, and I say it not because I was one of them, but I say it because I mean it, because I think it was a very good start of the discussion. And some of the topics already, I think, we touched on a few topics which I was very much hoping to that we would cover in this second panel. So we have really distinguished panelists in this second panel. I will just do a very brief introduction. We have Ms. Radka Bečeva from European Broadcasting Union. We have Mr. Davor Marko, who is a media researcher and consultant, an expert on public service media. We have Andrei, or we don't have Andrei currently in the room, but I think he does exist because we saw him in the morning. He was very active during the discussions, and he previously worked for the Polish television as well as for the Polish media regulator. We have Ms. Solvita Denisa, who is a media literacy advisor from the Baltic Center for Media Excellence. And of course, last but not least, we have Mr. Adrius Matonis from the Lithuanian National Radio and Television. So basically what I think should be the aim of this panel is really to discuss the role of public service media in the period which is characterized by this new phenomena, fake news, disinformation, propaganda. I think it would be useful not only to look at it, let's say, from the perspective of the Russian propaganda, but also to look at it from a wider angle. And there, I think, particularly some of the problems that we have already discussed, such as lack of funding, politicization of public service media, I think is something that I will be very glad to hear your opinions on. So without further ado, let me give the floor to Radka. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Rasto. I was listening with great interest this morning, the findings from your monitoring. Excellent initiative, and thank you very much for inviting me here. I'm head of member relations at the European Broadcasting Union for Eastern Europe. For those of you, I presume that all of you know, but European Broadcasting Union is a professional association of 73 members from 56 countries. And we have a long history because we were established in 1950. So I think when Rasto was saying that what is the role of public service media, why, etc., I think public service media indeed has a big role to play because we are well-established institutions. Some of our members are celebrating 90 and more years of history. We are very well regulated and self-regulated. When I say regulated, we could start with international standards ranging from Council of Europe recommendations on independence, independence of public service media, funding of public service media, remit of public service media, etc. Then we go to the national legislation because public service media are national resource, and they are also subject in the laws. They are regulated through the national legislation, where almost I think in all actually national laws, the Balkan, Davor, we know them by heart, the laws, but I'm not very familiar with all of the pre-Baltic laws, but most of them stipulate that public service media should provide programs which are of high quality, should be balanced, should be fact-checked, etc. So this all is provided already in the law. Then we have the self-regulation stipulated by Code of Ethics or Codes of Journalism, and public service media also abides to this law. And then in each public service media you have also the internal editorial rules and practices and best practices. So for instance, all public service broadcasters, even some of them are obliged by the law to publish rules for instance for covering of election campaigns. And then we have within our professional association, the European Broadcasting Union, in 2012, all members unanimously have adopted 6 core values, public service media core values, and these values are, it's worth mentioning because we are touching upon them a lot. These values are independence, universality, diversity, excellence, accountability, and innovation. Saying this, our public service media, you could imagine within 73 members, you have different speeds, of course, and different stages of development. We have very developed members, which are BBC, ARD and VRT or other members, and then you have members which are not only struggling with the transition from state media to public service media, or some of them are still pro forma state media, as Belarus, the colleague, mentioned. But they are struggling also with all disruptive elements which we are facing nowadays, ranging from technological developments, fragmentation of audience, vertical and horizontal integration, etc. They are in different developments, and of course they handle in different way also the challenges they are facing. We have spoken in the first panel about fake news, but we have spoken also about propaganda. I think that it is very good to distinguish, and even when you are presenting the results, if you see challenges for propaganda, just name it, because if we do not name it and we put everything under fake news and disinformation, it would not be correct. Because obviously, as we have public service media with different speed of development, we have also a public service media having different challenges. It's obvious that for the Balkan countries, for the Baltic countries, this would be the Russian propaganda, while for the other members it would be more fake news, or in other it could be disinformation, or different, or just a combination of all of them. Basically, the challenges are, I would say, they are funding. I think you very rightly also pointed out in the findings, because without independent, stable and predictable funding, it is very difficult for public service media to cover this broad remit, because they have all public service media as stipulated in their national legislation, they have to cover very broad remit, ranging from education, information, entertainment, and programs for different minorities, for different groups with disabilities, for children, for all segments basically of society. Funding is really fundamental, that it allows public service to handle all these programs on a high level and distinctive quality. Unfortunately, we see a tendency in recent years for switching from license fee to funding from the budget. We have just recently had Romania switching from a good actually a license fee to funding from the budget. We had recently also Poland switching from advertisement, but also to the budget. We have from the countries which you have monitored, Belarus, Moldova, Poland, Hungary, Ukraine, all they are funded from the budget. Of course, I mean, if it's for instance in Ukraine, because it was heavily advised by different advisors, there is a provision stipulating that certain percentage, 0.2 from the budget, should be allocated for funding, which gives a little bit of safeguard for independent of the funding. And as Mr. Odris said today, that thanks God we now do not have politicians really voting and discussing how much money we should get, because public service has to, it's a big enterprise. You have to plan your activities, especially for purchasing of sport acquisitions, 2 or even more years ahead when these events are going to happen. So it is very important that at least there are some safeguards in the legislation, that this funding should not be used as a mechanism, as a tool of politicians to exercise pressure on public service media. And we see that there, I mean, the political pressures are various. It could be, for instance, in Kosovo, Parliament is asking, it's not, I am just randomly saying it as an example, but it could happen everywhere. Kosovo is not in the countries you monitor, but for instance, parliaments ask public service to report every 3 months, which is too much of good. I mean, of course, public service should be transparent, but such reporting could really give a chance for politicians for bigger institutional and editorial independence. So safeguards are really important. Funding also all these austerity measures and shrinking budgets. Rightly was said in the morning session that it deprives public service media from the opportunity to have an appropriate correspondence network. But also look at the other point. For instance, in the EBU, we have so many initiatives on news exchange, on news committee, so different platforms where our members, all 73 members, could exchange experience. But if the broadcaster is under severe austerity measures, it cannot participate fully in all these activities, because it simply does not have money to send people to participate in all these events. So funding is really important. There is a strong political pressure. I mean, we see it in the different forms and in different displays, and this is something serious we all have to think how to deal with. I would like to draw your attention and maybe just to ask a rhetoric question, because we see now that there is a rise of right populist political forces in Europe, but these forces are also supported, unfortunately, by also critical mass of people in this country. So should we, as really researchers and people who are worrying about the developments and especially about the attacks on democracy in Europe, should we really think about the pressure coming also from this part of the audience which we are serving, which are also supporting this kind of approaches and attitudes, because these politicians are supported by some people in the audience. I think it is again very important that we distinguish between the propaganda and fake news, because the approaches would be different for fighting the two phenomena. I mean, for instance, fighting with fake news. Within the EBU, we have many members which are leaders. We have BBC, which have the reality check. We have YOE, the Finnish member, has the fact-checking team. In Danish radio, we had the fact-disc. In VRT, we have programs where they are discussing programs or fake news. So we have very strong fact-checkings and verification teams with the EBU. But even these teams sometimes are facing the challenge what to follow. I mean, are you going to follow every fake news? And it's a lot of resources and a lot of attention. And does really the society need to know about the fake news? I mean, these are real dilemmas in the newsrooms, what to follow, how to follow, and if you do not follow, again, you could be trapped why you do not follow if everyone around you is following. So these are the dilemmas real dilemmas in the newsrooms. While for propaganda, I think Rasto was just informally now over lunch was posing a very important question: how we professionally respond to this challenge. And I think that in the EBU we strongly believe that we should respond professionally, which means that to all this fake news, disinformation, propaganda, we should even more increase our professional standards, high quality and distinctiveness of presentation, of double, triple checking of facts, because this is in the heart of what we do, and this is how we distinguish ourselves from the others. So my response would be with even more increasing our professionalism and our professional skills. Of course, it is not easy because, as I made a metaphor over lunch, it's hard power versus soft power. I mean, you have a tank and then you are trying to tell the tank stop and to explain and to elaborate. But yes, we have to find and to be innovative, to build alliances and to try to respond to this. I would very briefly say just a few words on our approaches, how we think in the EBU we deal with this. We have a program which is called peer-to-peer review, where members from certain groups of members are going to peers, to other public service media, and they are actually advising them or estimating and evaluating how the other member is implementing the public service media values. I said to you, independence, excellence, etc. So these peer-to-peer reviews, they come out with reports which are available, of course, for the management of the public service, and it is very useful to increase the professional level. Then I think that we should really, I could only congratulate you for this initiative and encourage you to do more, and even to go deeper, for instance, to research what are the stations which have verification networks already established. If they do not have, why they do not have? What are the difficulties that they do not have? So the more analysis and the more studies we have, which we share with the professional community, the better. It was mentioned education. Of course, it is something important, but we also have to make it appealing to the audience and appealing to different groups, because if we are sounding too boring and too mentoring, maybe it could be not that efficient as we would like to be. And at the end, we should build alliances. I mean, I'm glad that Facebook was finally really pushed to make its fact-checking team and to have an alliance with ABC, with AP, with FactCheck.org, with PolitiFact, with SNOPS for fact-checking, because I mean, we know that they are big, and they should also bear their share of responsibility. I hope that it was useful, and I would be glad to answer any questions. We have a lot of research is done in the EBU. We have a special unit which is called Media Intelligence Service, which produces a lot of reports. Funding was mentioned. This is the newest addition, where you could see actually also this trend which I mentioned, that unfortunately some of the members are shifting from license fee to budget. But we have also another a very important publication. Some of them is, for instance, PSM correlation. Someone mentioned today in this survey, it is shown that the better funded public service media, there is a strong correlation between freedom of expression and better expression of speech with better funded public service media. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Radka, for this excellent introduction to the topic. I did a mistake. I didn't set the rules at the very beginning. I will have to be less generous than Dovile, because we have not so much time for this. So I will not. I suggest that we will not have questions right now. We will hear first from all speakers, and please try to be short in your first presentations, so we can leave enough time for the discussion. So with this, Davor, I'm interested, what is your opinion about this technology disconnect? Mm-hmm. What is your opinion about what Radka has already mentioned, these huge differences between various members? I mean, some of them able to produce good quality content. They already understand these challenges with new verification departments. But what about those countries where we don't have, let's say, enough funding, where we don't have technology developments? I mean, is it realistic to expect that public service media could still play a significant role? I mean, vis-a-vis this new phenomenon of fake news, disinformation.
Okay, Rasta, thank you. I will try to respond to all these questions. I'm Davor. I come from Western Balkan region. I mostly work in Serbia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, and Croatia. I'm non-resident fellow of two research centers. One is CU, Center for Media, Data and Society, and they delegated me for this roundtable. And another is Analytica. This is a research think tank from Sarajevo, Bosnia and Herzegovina. And we did one intensive research project in 7 countries of the Western Balkan to detect the main challenges of public broadcasters. Because in 7 countries there are 10 broadcasters, public broadcasters in this region, and all these broadcasters share some common problems, but also have something specific. But also as researcher on PSB, I'm a member of different initiatives, and I try to grasp it on a more global scale, and to see what are also good examples and what these good examples could tell us and how we can follow them and implement part of this. So I compiled this presentation in a couple of slides, trying to tackle these challenges, and I will provide you some specific examples from the globe, not only from the region of Western Balkan or East Europe. So I come definitely from the region where propaganda is something very established. To use Star Wars terminology, these countries that I work in are master lords of propaganda, taking into account the recent happenings from 90s, wars, war propaganda, etc., etc. And this is one of the shortcomings of the region and public broadcasters, because they were highly instrumentalized for the cause of propaganda during the 90s, and that was one of the biggest challenge for them to be transformed into public service media, because they were former state control, like in all Central and Eastern post-Soviet countries. So I need to... What I need to do?
With the arrow sheet,
Yes.
On the right?
Right.
Do we have an expert on this?
No, doesn't. Maybe it doesn't have a battery.
Okay.
Works with this one.
Okay, great. Great. So these are big issues that are related to public service media and their expected role to be trusted, reliable sources of information to counter these challenges caused by propaganda or by fake news production and misinformation. So it's first is ownership, second is technology, then connectivity and interaction, funding, as Radka mentioned, and innovation and creative approach. So ownership, the main problem in these countries, former communist or socialist countries, is the notion of public. You know, in the process of transformation of this media, the audience, the citizens were not in position to really feel this media belong to the public, to themselves. And this missing link is something that has partially caused the lack of trust in this media today. I have to say that in most of the countries of Western Balkan, like in most part of the Europe, public service media are highly popular. They are very watched, etc., but they are not trusted. They are not trusted. So that's disproportion, especially in the Western Balkan. In Western Balkan, comparing to the European Union, much more trusted are online sources, social media. So there is no discussion on defining principles, and they're mostly normative. EBU had a very good project, collaboration between EBU and scholars on public service media, and they published Vision 2020, where they tackle 10 very important challenges and related recommendations. So Roberto, who is who leads this media intelligence service, and one of the leading scholars on PSM, Gregory Farrell from Tampere University, they tackled this issue, and they said, okay, most of these media, public service media, were transformed, and this transformation was led by normative principles, and these are intrinsically democratic values. But other two types of values were abandoned, and these two types of values are exchange values and use values. And these values are crucial to establish the missing link between these broadcasters and their consumers, and consumers of their programs, which are the citizens of the states. There is a document, it's available online, and I suggest you and highly recommend you to see, which is really interesting because members and representatives of EBU members were highly active in designing this document. So it is not designed by one person or group of experts, it is designed by combination of experts, EBU members, and public broadcasters. Technology disconnect is something definitely that's distinguished public service media and commercial media and growing Facebook, social media platforms, social media networks, and even research engines that are also providing news, because public service media, even the BBC, have been designed in completely different context, and they still rely on the logic that is tied to this context. So they have a big challenge to adapt to a change media ecology and to dominant paradigm of network society. And this is reflected on several aspects. So their production suffer, dissemination of the content suffer. They're not still active on online platforms like other media. Also, their structural organization and corporative culture is suffering from this old paradigm, which is based on traditional principles. In most of the countries of Western Balkan, for example, they have too many employees, too many hierarchical layers for decision makers, etc., etc. While commercial competitors, I mentioned you N1, which has the network in Western Balkan, and Al Jazeera, they have, for example, 50 to 100 employees, and they're producing program on a daily basis, while, for example, Serbian broadcaster has almost 4,000 employees. and Croatian 2050, something like that. They're just trying to reduce the number of employees, and they're doing it strategically, but it's still too much for new logic, business logic of media. So this is crucial thing. I think that 7 out of 10 recommendations from EBU Vision 2020 deal with interaction with public. One explicitly deal with interaction with young public. Young public is mostly living in online space, and they are consuming media contents in a completely different way than most of these broadcasters are offering. So they're not consuming it linearly. They want new formats, they want interactive formats, they want to be part of it, because if they are part of production process, communication process, discussion process, they feel that they are part of it. And if they feel if they are part of it, they start to believe, they start to trust. I will mention you 2 examples. One is from Flanders. This is from Belgium, Flanders broadcaster. I was there last year, and they mentioned two very interesting examples. They organized Open Day. They rented one abandoned space outside of Antwerpen, and they organized 1 or 2 day. They produced their shows in that rented space, and they invited citizens to join them in producing the content. So people, citizens of Flanders, they had a chance to meet the people who are behind the scene, behind the screen, and to take active part in production process, and that dramatically increased the trust and popularity of that television. Another example, also the same television, they started collaboration with startups, with individuals and organizations that they are doing something in creative way. And they developed their project, which is called Sandbox. And Sandbox, actually, there is a like separate web page you can see what they produce. But the idea is to include these people who are creative. Also, rebranding is also one very, very important important step. Public Service from Japan, I had a chance to speak with their vice director this September. They said, for our public mission of our broadcaster is to save human lives, and they develop interactive platform to report on disasters like earthquakes and floods and something like this. Also funding, I will skip this because Ratkaus already mentioned it, but the license fee proved to be the best model of funding, because license fee established direct relation between citizens, users of media content, and public broadcasters. Everything else is like moderated or indirect. And innovative approaches, I already mentioned these examples. This is important to increase interaction, to experiment with new formats, contents, and approaches. For example, in Serbia, which is a really interesting case, their cultural department decided to lively broadcast one theater piece, which lasted 24 hours, so theater piece lasted 24 hours. They broadcasted it lively. It was full of some kind of explicit scenes, but it was like artistic expression, and that provoked many discussion within Serbian society, and that's the point of public broadcaster, also to provoke, to discuss, is it the role of public broadcaster, why it is a role, so they organized follow-up several shows to discuss this. And several just remarks. So there is a need to rebrand public media as depoliticized medium, following and responding to society. So this is the concept of EBU, return to society. Need to repurpose public service content to keep up with powerful, far-reaching technologies. Need to establish regular, two-way and intensive interaction with its audience. Public control is crucial, not controlled by the parliament like in Kosovo. It is important, but not the crucial public control. So mechanisms that citizens are allowed to to comment and to appeal. And innovative approaches and creativity are necessary. And I will just finish with my title. And this is the best definition of public service media or broadcaster that I found in literature. It is coined by Karol Jakubowicz, who was known as one of the best media experts for this part of Europe. He said there are 100 different definitions of public service media, but I found this one the most appealing one because it allows individuals also to include their own expectations from this media into definition of it. So when you see program of good quality, of good reliability, which is educative, which is informative, etc., you know that this program fulfills the mission of public service media. And this is the best way to tackle either propaganda, either fake news.
Excellent, Davor. Thank you very much for these ideas, for these thoughts that you shared. Let's go immediately to Andrzej. We have already discussed the case of Polish broadcaster. I mean, you are someone who worked for that broadcaster a long time ago. You also worked for the Polish media regulator. How is it possible that we see such tendencies now? I mean, we are talking about a need to depoliticize, yet in at least 2 EU member states, we see exactly the opposite tendencies. So what can you tell us about this Polish case?
Yes, I would like to comment not only about Polish case, but basing on Polish case, I would like to talk a little bit more general. So let me start with Karol Jakubowicz. Yes, I used to know him very well. I remember he died a couple of years ago, and let me tell you, in fact, I was sitting at his desk in Regulators. Yes. So maybe something, remained that. So I am brave to say that if Karol Jakubowicz was alive, he would not call Polish television a public television. I'm absolutely sure. Because, and you, Rasto, you asked why. Whatever we say about values of public television, whatever like you said about all the levels of protection, if situation in certain country comes to the situation like in Poland or in Hungary, that authorities in this country definitely have non-democratic program, definitely would like to have a form of dictatorship, however cultural dictatorship, you can phrase it whatever you say, but in fact when you see it, you know what it is. By the way, this definition by Karol Jakubowicz about public media also applies to pornography.
Yeah, but that's
you know it when you see it.
From 60s.
Yes. And this is what's going on with Hungary and Poland, and Belarus was also mentioned here. Belarus is also a member of EU, yes? Is it?
Yes.
As well as Russia. So, when I was listening to you, I was, what reminded me, you said we should distinguish between fake news and propaganda. In the 70s, our leaders, you are old enough to remember it, our leaders were saying the internal affairs of our country, stay away, you people from the West. It's internal affairs. I want to remind all of us that since 1975, Helsinki agreements, this argumentation is not valid anymore. Because in Helsinki agreements, we agreed to so-called third basket of human rights, human values, and democratic media are part of that. So please, the distinguishing between fake news and propaganda is applicable only in democratic environment. When you have environment like in Poland, like in Hungary, like in Russia, like in Belarus, it does not apply. Because I can recall you my funny experience with EBU from 2004. That time, the head of Polish television was the guy Robert Kwiatkowski. He was from the left. And we were mad at Polish TV because it was very much supporting the government, the left. And then suddenly, Mr. Kwiatkowski said, Poland television got the award from EBU to be the best public TV in Europe. And we were like this. Saying we, I was the deputy head of Polish Journalists Association that time. We checked that. He was plainly lying. We found that he was mad. So I can imagine that next year, Mr. Kurski, now the head of Polish TV, may say that Polish TV likely was the least influenced by fake news. It may be true. They don't run fake news on Polish TV because the all programs are fake, you know. So they don't need to detect this Russian influence, whatever, you know. So I think that what they do, that they have propaganda, and I was trying to show you how much of propaganda, how is it done, how is it going on. They don't need to import fake news. In fact, I traced 1 or 2 cases, very small. But it does not mean that this is the real public service television. It is not. The same goes for radio. So, just to conclude, I think that all these measures, all of what you are talking about, very rightly, nice, we have to have a map in front of us. And on this map, democratic countries should be green, and countries like Poland, like Hungary, Russia, Belarus, should be whatever from rouge to red or black, whatever. And only then we can judge and we can talk about false news and propaganda in these cases. Please remember that. That's it.
Excellent. Thank you very much for this reminder, and as well as your suggestions. Solvita. Wherever I go, I hear media literacy, digital literacy. You know, that should be the answer because people are not familiar, you know, with this new phenomena. You know, they I mean, we never had this, particularly in this part of the world. It was never part of the school curriculum. We learn about literature. You know, we studied important writers, but we never learn how to actually consume media content. So, of course, it is a big challenge. I mean, it's a big challenge for our generation of our parents. What do you think about this? You know, I mean, how shall we proceed in order to make sure that people would actually understand what is the difference between investigative reporting and tabloid journalism, and why do they need the first one rather than the second one?
Thank you, Rasto, but I would like to start with our small talk with Pan Krajewski this morning. And we discussed that disinformation is even here in this room. We do not have round table here. This is not a round table. We have a lot of tables. And this is a square, not a round. Yes, and it's really a great pleasure to be here. And today I would like to share some experience from Latvia. and I will speak on behalf of two organizations. So here you can see only Baltic Center for Media Excellence, but I am also representing Vidzeme University of Applied Science, and sometimes it is easier to be academic and to share some experience without one organization, but to have one hat and two hats. In this presentation, I will focus on media literacy and critical thinking activities, and I'm going to introduce you to some projects, but I would like to start with some bad news. Sorry for that. We will have some good news after. These two organizations are dealing with media literacy for children, youth, adults, parents, seniors, journalists and other stakeholders, including politicians. Our politicians are also not so competent in media literacy sphere, environment. Or in other words, our approach is to work with very limited, specific and targeted groups of people. And it is important, firstly, you cannot address the specific groups with, let's call it, general message, and no silver bullets. Youngsters want to be entertained, mainly in social networks. If we want to attract their attention to the quality of information they are using, we need to know who they are, what are they doing, and how they are attracted. In our today's discussion, for example, by Kremlin's platform, or local Kremlin-related platforms, or foreign hidden partners of Kremlin stratcomists. Secondly, there is no such thing as one central channel to address nation, and we are talking not only about media, we also are talking about urban environment. We are talking about smartphones and T-shirts. There is nothing written here, but it is possible that I'll come with a message written here, and you will have some cognitive dissonance with my words and what is written here. And so my approach to media literacy is based on strategic political communication. We have to know not only what the audience already know, we have to know their interests, their demands, and their real media consumption. And why I said real, I'm afraid that there are hidden platforms, hidden applications, which are not counted in surveys. And the quick look on TNS data, GEMIOS data will show that no porno hubs, no root trackers are presented in this top 50 or even top 100. So we need to find relevant data. And in general, the number of watchers is decreasing, and the global trend to use smartphones to get content is actually also for the Baltics. And I have some doubts about ability of public service media to adapt the philosophy of marketing in this transmedia storytelling. In our newsrooms, I spent almost 15 years in the newsroom, working as a journalist, as editor. I do not work for TV anymore, but I still see the lack of marketing in social media. Yes, it is emerging. It is challenging for public service media. Of course, it is easier to work in traditional way. And my hypothesis is that public service media are losing in the field of smartphones, at least in Latvia. And I have some examples. Russian language programs in Latvia, we do not have special channel as Estonians do, but we have some programs in Latvian on our second Latvian television channel, LTV7. And the Facebook page of so-called Ruskое вещание, broadcast in Russian, has only 3,500 followers. Only 3,500 followers. The most popular politician, Russian language politician from Latvia, Nil Ushakov, he has 220,000 followers. And we had elections recently, municipal elections, and the political organization Saskaņa decided to make their own, not election night show, but election day show, when it was even prohibited for journalists to talk about elections. And they made a really very interesting newscast, news program show, and the show was shown in Facebook newsfeed. It's a real show with news stories, with interviews, with Vox Populi, with experts invited and interviewed. But it and also the newsroom was designed in a very, very common way as public service media does. So another example is from Lithuania. After your elections, you had, our hosts had elections 1 year ago, and after the second tour of elections, Gabrielius Landsbergis addressed his voters in his Facebook. And it wasn't recording, it was live, but the number of views also was around 120,000. So what about your normal
Audience?
Normal audience? I think it is around 100, am I right?
150, I guess, if it's for news program.
Yes.
150.
So, and this is one person in his Facebook, and so the role of public service media as a kind of a mediator is decreasing. And another problem of public service media online, it is easier to lose gatekeeper function. So when you are transmitting live from the press conference and only one side of conflict is presented, and of course, another problem, public service media in Russian, at least in Estonia and in Latvia, are represented as counter-propagandist. So it is labeling. And possibly there are also some problems like local journalists are not trained or possibly not so talented enough to battle this Kremlin-produced entertainment, because we are not only working on the level of hard news content, we are of course talking about this soft news content. And now I will move to our approach and why our approach works. Point number one, developers of media literacy projects should be involved in research on strategic political communication. You need to have strong background in research, or at least to be involved in Stratcom network to get actual information about trends and tools, or just to react to some news. To understand long-term and short-term effects, it is not just pedagogical or just media background. If there is shared background with Stratcom, it works. It is not just media education. Point number two, even if Russia is on your mind, even if all the data you have are based on Kremlin narratives, Kremlin channels, you should translate your knowledge to general issues. When you are working with target audiences like teachers, like pupils, and like seniors, for example. This is your credibility, especially working with Russian language audience, and it will make the audience ready for challenges coming from local radicals or global manipulators. And this is why some local politicians are not in reality interested in critically thinking voters, but this is, of course, a separate issue. Point number three, media literacy is mainly perceived as an answer to some activities, native ads, political propaganda, disinformation, to battle narratives, to show fakes, and so on. I suggest another approach, and it is to be proactive. We need to create a firewall. Let's treat media literacy as a kind of vaccination. The trend is decreasing. My hypothesis is that, this fake news, we all are tied not only on news, we are tied also on fake news. And I will present some our projects of Baltic Center for Media Excellence. Pure Facts. This project was created with the Latvian radio and Latvian public media portal, the target audience radio listeners. So our target audience was seniors on radio and web-active audience for news portal. With radio, we developed 4 weekly discussions programs, and we also recorded info clips. These info clips were in rotation like a social campaign. There was a special theme for each week, and we started with family issues. We talked about generational split. The next project was developed in order to attract attention of social media audience to sharing some news online in social networks. Celebrities, including the Minister of Foreign Affairs, participated in action developed by Baltic Center for Media Excellence and the Center of Investigative Journalism, Rebaltica. And the title of this project was Google Before Go Mad. So you have to check information. And of course, we have a lot of activities for teachers, for journalists, and if I will have possibility, I will answer on your questions. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. We'll have the last speaker, Audrius. If I may, I mean, we have already heard a very interesting presentation you did during the first panel about the operations of the Lithuanian national radio and television. I would have more specific question now for you, actually two of them. One is related to what Solvita has mentioned about this technology disconnect, if I can put it this way, and her skepticism about the ability of PSM to actually, adopt to this new marketing model, so to say. And the second thing is something that we identified in our monitoring, which is this no long-term strategy on explaining what is fake news, disinformation. Can you speak about these two things?
Sure, I like your approach. I was going to suggest, but why don't we spare time by skipping my presentation and switching to Q&A session. I'm not a researcher, so I didn't prepare a big report. I'm a news guy, so it's much more convenient for me to ask questions and sometimes to answer them. But first of all, let me start with the defension of our organizers. It's about regarding round table. You don't have to be in a Chatham House to obey Chatham House rules. So I guess that sticks to the round table discussion. So it's okay, guys, to sit at a square table. Not a problem. Yeah, so the first good news about my presentation was that it's the last one. So hopefully you'll have coffee in several minutes. Just to fuel up a little bit the discussion, let me start with the controversy, claiming that I don't believe in combating misinformation and fake news. And here I do agree with Solvita. I think that the best way to deal with fake news and misinformation is to be so good that nobody listens to the fake news and to misinformation and switches on you, on your channel. Easy to say, harder to do. But again, don't blame on me on being primitive. But again, one of the major questions and answers in this situation is money, money, and money. If you put enough money into the enterprise, in this case, in the public broadcaster, you'll have a result. Because money means best professionals available on the market. Money means best products being available on the market. And that means stable and big audience and faithful audience. And in this case, you don't even have to use any anti-propaganda, in which I believe even less than in combating fake news. You don't even have to deconstruct any fake news. There will be no need if you'll make your audience to watch you, and you yourself will not proceed with the fake news. I've heard some skeptical opinions about abilities of public broadcasters in nowadays to adapt to the new market rules, to new market reality. But I do think that the funeral bells are not ringing for a public broadcaster in this part of the world, meaning Europe at least. We might not be the most popular channel here, but according to the polls, to the surveys, of course we paid for that survey, but nevertheless I do believe in the results. Those surveys showed that people ranking us number 3 by the popularity, rank us number 1 as a most trusted media group in this country, including other TV channels, radios, news portals, so on and so forth. We might be number 3 in a days like when business as usual, when business as usual. But when it comes up with the crisis, even with the elections, not somebody would call elections a crisis, but even elections, we are becoming number 1. When the Russians started the Crimea war, war in Ukraine, annexing Crimea, we stayed on the number 1 position for several days consequently. Of course, this is not was only because we are so militarized and we are so interested in what happens in other parts of the world. Of course, was very personal, because as you've said yourself, our feeling was that we will be the next. Today it's Ukraine, tomorrow Russians will be knocking on our door. So the feeling of crisis, the feeling of big danger, existential danger, made people switch to the national broadcaster, which I'm proud of. That doesn't mean that we are producing only crisis-orientated production, no. But that production isn't as entertaining as commercials are doing. And again, this is not because we cannot do this. When I was approached several years ago by our governing board asking, look, why our news are not as popular as of some of TV commercial channels? And I said that I can provide you a lot of answers and explanations, and I did this. But I said, I can do the news that would be even more popular than of our competitors. Just give me 3-4 months, 6 months at most. But I don't envy me myself answering you in 6 months why our content of news is such. So if you want to be watched, you should show no news but news dramas, pseudo news. You should serve human instincts. But we are made by the law on media, by the special law on Lithuanian radio and television. I don't know if other countries do have a special law on their national broadcaster. We have a special law on Lithuanian radio and television, and that law makes us to stick to some proportions in news. It makes us to perform a mission of educating, broadening of understanding, and all that blah, blah, blah. Integrating all those society groups, and so on and so forth. So of course, so we are doing this. I'm not trying to say that we are doing this forcibly, or we are suffering in doing this. No, because if not us, who will make reports about the, let's say, problems of deaf people or those who cannot move on their feet, so on and so forth? Because the audience is small, this is not entertaining, and nobody will show those news. So, of course, we are doing this, but we understand also very clearly that that doesn't earn us the audience. It grades our ratings. So it's not about the ability, as I've said, of national broadcaster to adapt the new rules of game. It's about understanding that you just simply exist on some different rules than all the other players in the market. About the literacy of usage of media. You know, my granddaughter, which is 4, understands my iPad much better than me myself.
This is digital literacy, this is not media literacy.
I mean that all the generations, but although she cannot read and she cannot write, of course. But what I'm trying to say that all the generations, she's only 4, she cannot write. Probably Poles are smarter, but we Lithuanians start writing only at 5 or 6.
I have older
Okay, so all the generations, they are developing their skills themselves according to their needs. So I'm absolutely sure that all the generations, we cannot teach them how to use the media. They'll teach themselves. And it's only us who can produce such a program that they will be, they would want to consume and to learn the useful things. So you cannot have a young one or older one. You cannot have him sitting at your table and saying, look, when you see this, please think that we are trying to say this and that. No, it doesn't work. He will never listen. He has his own mind in his own head, so anything you can want to teach him, it's just forget him. Look at yourself and do a good job, what you are paid for. So you'll have the result. Rasto, would you remind me the questions?
Yes, but first of all, I think let's agree that this was enough, I think, for the presentation part. Let's go to the, as you suggested, to the questions and answers.
Okay.
And I remember my question, but I also don't want to monopolize and I don't want to abuse my role of moderator.
You see, Rasto, this is a problem and a danger to have me as a speaker.
No, you did very well. You did very well, I think. And I was trying very hard to save, and I am glad to announce we have 25 minutes for discussion. If you voluntarily agree to shorten your coffee break, which I think we don't have to vote on, there seems to be an agreement that I feel. Okay, so in any case, I open the table for discussion, and let's try to address this interesting panel with questions. Anyone want to start? Radka?
I think that interesting question was raised actually, that how we deal with members or public service media which do not adhere to the high standards of public service media. Well, I mean, we have, of course, the possibility of sanctions. But in the school, if you have someone who performs really bad, do you immediately expel him from school, or you try to work with him and to keep him in the loop and working with him? So, I mean, we could discuss. I think that neither the European Union nor many of the other international organizations found really a effective mechanism how to deal with violations, basically, of human rights.
It's on Article 7. It's in the working.
I'm afraid you are not expelling Russians just because they're paying a significant payment into EBU's budget. Because you've said that you don't expel people from the school if they don't learn, but sometimes you expel Russia from Olympics because of usage of some preparates.
Call parents, for example.
Yeah, but whom would you call to EBU meeting to answer for Russian state media? Mr. Putin, I'm afraid he will not come. I'm sorry, I do understand you are not responsible for the EBU's policy, but...
Just to follow this comment for a moment, so this is why I said about this map, because it shouldn't be more money, better service, because the best service is Russia today, the most money. So distinguish between environment, democratic environment, yes, authoritarian, non-democratic, whatever you call it, we know when we see it, this rule should not apply. More money, best service.
Just coming back quickly to this question, and then Davor. I think it's really a not easy one. I agree with you, and it's not only EBU. I mean, look at the Council of Europe. They are dealing with a very similar problem, and to the extent that after Russia invaded Crimea, they froze the membership. And as you suggested, actually, that they actually did not pay their portion of the Council of Europe budget. And now it's a dilemma for the organization if they are going to, let's say, stick to their core values, which, in my view, with this such a principle question, I mean, I think they should, because this is why this institution, first of all, was founded many years ago. Or they go with this policy of engagement, you know, because then you have also the question of Russians, regular Russians' ability to use the court in Strasbourg, for example, so you don't want to strip them of this opportunity. But I think it's a very complex, question. It's not only, it cannot be simplified by just saying, if it's a question of money or not. But let's go Davor and then Radka and anyone else.
Yeah, just wanted that maybe one more thing which we did not touch upon, but it's naming and shaming. I mean, we could still, whenever there is a violation or there is something disturbing, we could raise voice, and this is basically what we in the EBU are very much doing. It was in the case of Poland, it was in the case of Croatia, it was in the case of many other, whenever we see a violation, we are very vocal, and not only this, but we also mobilize the whole international community to join in expressing concern and expressing dismay with these developments.
I didn't mention Russia influence during my presentation, so I will use this opportunity maybe shortly to discuss it, which is of concern of this round table. And I welcome the idea of visual representation of maps, because in the case of Western Balkan, that will clearly indicate a demarcation of Russian influence in the Western Balkan. For example, Serbia is prone to be like pro-Russian state. You know, Mother Russia is like formula in which all politicians are dealing with. But Croatia, on the other side, is completely against this. They're part of Western Europe, also Slovenia, and they're not, lean towards Russian propaganda. Bosnia and Herzegovina is divided because it has two entities. One is Republika Srpska, which is also close to Russia and Russian influence, and while the other part, which is Croat-Bosniak part federation, is not dealing with it in this way. So these are very peculiar differences within the region. So far we don't have kind of fake news. We are not suffering from the influence of fake news placed by Russians, but we have a Sputnik agency, of course, and then doing this kind of soft propaganda, on a long term, placing certain information in a certain way, selecting information, filtering, etc., etc. And one more remark, I had no time to elaborate in it. It's about funding. For example, some examples of public service media show that funding is not the only and the ultimate guarantee of public service media independence. Croatia is the best example. Croatia has one of the best models of funding. Its license fee model. It was developed from 1960, so it has a continuum in this way. So it was, continuously developed. Collection rate is 98%. And they still keep this model of funding, so the government has no influence on it because it is collected by a public broadcaster itself. But it doesn't prevent government to influence the program, appointment process, etc., etc. So this is a very peculiar example. In Serbia, we have a totally different example where license fee was, abandoned, because the Cuban president of Serbia said this in his Twitter account. He promised that he will, abolish it. And they established tax now, and the tax is very small, so it is kind of influence and kind of mechanism to limit the influence and the scope of work of public broadcaster, but they still keep it independent in certain way to show that they have independent public broadcasters and to use it as an argument that the current government of Serbia is democratic. And external actor that influenced the amount of tax was not EBU or some European actor, but International Monetary Fund that made their assessment of the economics of Serbia, and they estimate that this is realistic amount, and they put the pressure on the government, and they indirectly decide about this.
Thank you. Any more people? Yes, Kaisa?
Yeah, I just wanted to add on the funding question. Actually, in Estonia, we have almost the entirety of the public broadcaster's budget comes straight from the state, and that's by far the main source. But still, the quality is really good by what I observed, and I think it kind of comes down to a sense of culture as well, because I don't think any politician or anyone at all, I've never heard anyone expect the public broadcasting to serve their agenda. I don't think they perceive it as even really possible. And second of all, I think all kind of clusters of society kind of accept that they could get either good or bad coverage from the evening news program, depends on how things are going. So, I mean, I think it would be interesting to compare why exactly do we have this strong culture of public media freedom, but I think it's there, and in that case, I don't think the majority of the state budgeting is such a big issue in itself.
Because you said that it's now from the budget. It's not. However, it's very interesting. What's very characteristic for Poland, it has been for a long time, that people are evading paying license fee. So in fact, this is about, it differs, but between 20 and 30% of the households are paying license fee, and with the recent changes in what they are showing, it's going less. And you know what the government did last year? First time in July, they extended a loan from the state bank to TVP, 600 million zlotys, and then straight from the budget in November, 800 million zlotys. There was a problem with explanation. Why? In this kind of environment, they always find a good reason. It was a compensation from the state budget for those who are not paying because they are old or low income. Never ever before it was such a compensation in the history of the budgets, but you can always do better. So in fact, yes, it's moving from license fee to the state budget, and you can imagine that it was a reward for Mr. Kurski for what he was doing, and what he was doing I was showing you. That's it.
But you know, either license fee or budget, the origin of the money is the same. It's a taxpayer.
Yeah.
So, I mean, so we can talk only about the role of the state in the distribution of that money. So if the role is minimalized, that means that there's no difference if it comes through some regulation institution, state, or directly from the taxpayers. So, I mean, if you exclude the role of distributor, then it's absolutely okay. By the way, the previous reporter mentioned as a good example, as the best model of financing of a public broadcaster, the license fee. But unfortunately, no license fees were installed in past 50 years. Because this is very, very unpopular move. No government would risk, if it's not an authoritarian regime, would risk an establishment of one more tax for a thing which was free of charge for centuries before. Nobody would do this. The most funny thing is that the law on tax fee license fee was adopted in this country 15 years ago, I guess, but it was never invoked because the politicians didn't dare to adopt the consequent legal acts how to install that. So we stayed being financed from the budget through the parliament, and then, as I've said previously 4 years ago, this is a mathematical formula. That's it. No role of the state institution involved. So this is good. This is good. And just a very short replica to Kaisa. You said that it depends on culture. I mean, the willingness of the politicians to dictate for the journalists. I'm afraid that we are living in a global world where the same rule applies. You cannot find a country and a politician who wouldn't want to dictate the media. In some cases they succeed, in some cases they don't. In some cases they succeed just because this is an authoritarian country. In some cases they don't succeed just because the journalists have a strong backbone. Does it called a backbone? Backbone, and that's it. And you said that, sure. And by the way, you said that you cannot imagine the situation in Estonia. Let me tell you this. My good friend, he was previously head of news in Estonia, national TV. He said that he stopped picking phones during the news programs and after that until the next morning, because he said he's sick and tired of the politicians calling him and blaming what you showed me wrong in a wrong way, and please show me tomorrow in a good way, and so on and so forth. So there are no exceptions. So, and it's up to us, well, again, how we deal with those attempts to dictate. And I think that here solidarity is very, very important thing. I think that all of us should care about what is happening in Poland right now, what happened in Hungary. I'm not, very well acquainted with the situation in Bulgaria. If you've said that this is also a ridiculous situation, we should talk about this, because you don't have an idea when the situation can knock on your door. As I've said, I was pretty sure that for 20 years of being absolutely independent, now we are in a big crisis, in a huge conflict with the ruling party, which might result in chaos of and absolutely different situation. Yes, this is always, yes, on the first basis. This one guy is the leader of the ruling party, this one, and this is one of our journalists, and they clash now every day on the media. So,
okay, thank you very much. I have two more speakers at the moment on my list. First is Ivan, then Dovile. Kaisa, would you also then like to comment? Okay, Ivan.
Yeah, thank you very much, Rasto. I don't want to open it too much because it's probably not that much time, but I just wanted to ask maybe Audrius and you, Radka, as well, once we are discussing the fake news and approach to disinformation by the channels or by the institutions, whether you are planning to create something specific, how maybe to tackle it, or maybe how maybe to approach it with other colleagues from Estonia or from Lithuania, and even I agree that the individual approach is probably the best, or whether there is some kind of, I don't know, I don't want and I don't like the idea of manuals, but simply whether there is any kind of a policy adopted from the EBU on that respective idea.
Okay, before we go into answers, let's finish maybe with comments, and then I will give you like a floor for final comments on this. So, Dovila.
So let me challenge you a little bit, because you've been talking about the money equals the quality of production. With all that I agree, but we're talking about the new technologies, 21st century, so we need to look forward, right? And everyone are convinced that Russia is so successful because of greater financial support it receives. That's all sources, and that's true. But just one observation, actually a real thing. This September in Vilnius, we had Vilnius Young Leaders meeting, and we gathered people from the region, Baltic states, Russia, and 4 Eastern Partnership countries, young professionals in one or another way related to debunking lies, increasing media literacy, and so on. And there was this example of a Latvian participant, Yanis Polis. Maybe you know him. He's a PR expert, and on his free time, he's a blogger. So what he discovered, his report was just published last month. So basically, useful idiots that even help Russian propaganda to spread, and they're doing it on very low cost, and they're doing as useful idiots. They might not understand what's happening. So this is what is the system, right? What he told, basically, there is a young Latvian who wants to receive a haircut free haircut from his hairdresser. So he makes a deal. I'm going to establish a website. Establishing is on a very low cost, basically, as long as you know how to do it, right? So you need to advertise, and if you need to advertise, you need readers. And what he's doing, he is starting with some kind of funny videos with kittens, then where to get free content. He goes to Russia Today, Sputnik, everywhere where he can get it for free. And he doesn't care what he publishes, because he just needs to generate readers. So if Justin Bieber is arriving to Riga, and that people gonna read that and generate you, I don't know, 10,000, 100,000 and more readers. So, okay, and if it's fake, I don't care. So basically, he is acting on behalf, he's helping Russian propaganda. And another factor, what he discovered, even National Bank of Latvia is advertising on such websites, because they do not handpick where to advertise. PR companies, basically, they have this some kind of IT programs that pick on most readable websites. So this is where I'm leading. You're talking about money, and I agree on that point. But this guy, he is using this very cheap kind of methods and accessing a lot of readers. So my question would be, what are the ways for our public broadcasters to be this equally inventive and to go to to internet, to other technologies, and cost effective? I know in some countries funding is already very cost effective, but what about such kind of other approaches?
Great. We have maybe last comment from Kaisa, and then we go to answers.
Right. No, I just wanted to answer on or just specify on the culture issue. I don't doubt that politicians keep calling. I think they call every outlet and complain about various things. But I don't think, particularly in the case of public broadcasting, I don't think they have an actual strong expectation to succeed. And I think that's the difference. Also, I think it's quite telling in itself that the journalists feel free not to answer at all.
Okay. Okay. Final.
Yeah, thank you. I would like to add to Dovile's, to expand to Dovile's and Kaisa's question or remark. I fully agree that money is needed to guarantee professionalism. However, it's not everything, money. And it's not a naive notice, it's an experience. So my question would be, what other factors are needed because I strongly believe that even the culture factor, the school of journalism, the quality of school of journalism, the value system do matter. But please, you are in that field, so what are the other factors guaranteeing the quality of the production? And then another question is, what are the obstacles? What impedes the national broadcasters to move into the social space, into social media space?
Great. So let me quickly summarize the questions. Ivan was asking about this, whether there is a consideration for, to create some kind of targeted policy vis-à-vis fake news, disinformation. Then we had also the question by Dovile, what about other methods, of more creative approach of generating money, and this way being, spreading the information in innovative ways. And then the final question, as putting money aside, what else, should we consider? So I'm addressing now the panel. Radka?
To answer, there are various, as I said, various EBU initiatives starting, of course, with this. I mentioned that Facebook announced its own fact-checking alliance with partners ABC News, AP Fact-Checking, or Polity Fact and Snopes. If in a Facebook users report a story to be fake, it is passed on to these partners for review. Stories which fail the authenticity test are flagged with the warning disputed by third-party fact checkers. And there are also published tips for spotting false news, which first start with be skeptical of headlines, look closely at the URL, consider the photos, look at other reports, etc. But this is just chunk of our activities. Within the EBU, we have a special body, the news committee. We have a TV committee, and actually they have a very regular meeting where news makers from all over Europe get together and exchange experiences and exchange best practices. Then I should mention also the EBU, the Eurovision Academy, Training Academy, where we have also special trainings on people, and especially on online media, fake news, and verification networks. So it's there are various activities in various directions, like training, alliance, and also kind of a guidance and tips how to find the. If you go to the EBU web page where there is the news exchange, you have also the social news wire where everything is explained, actually, because we have a specialized team in the Eurovision News Exchange which deals also with this and helps members when it comes to such news. Audrey, maybe just to answer to your question, of course funding is important. We discussed a lot. But I think that it's very important constant training and constant capacity building of professionals. This is by far really very, very important, especially in nowadays circumstances where journalists have to be much more agile, have to handle with changing technologies. It's much more required. Thank you.
Great. Would you like to answer any of these questions that were?
Yes, I've understood several. They are directed directly for me. So, but I'll be very short, really. This time I'm serious. Look, don't call me stubborn, but I do think that money is essential, and no puttings aside. As Russians say, the meaning of life is not money, but it's quantity. So, to paraphrase it, of course, the main reason for good public broadcaster, for its existence, of course, it's not money itself, but the things money can buy. That means good production, quality production, and or good journalists. If a journalist is good, and good journalist, you know, is a professional one, the quality of the production will be adequate. I mean, whereas it's entertainment, it will be entertaining. Where it's news, it will be news. If it's analysis, it will be analysis. But people have to be paid for this. This is life. This is real life. Of course, we have patriots of public broadcasting, and me myself, I'm earning less in this channel that I would earn in commercial one. But would I be satisfied working there? Probably not. I don't want to produce such things they call news. Those are not news. Those are news drama. I'm old enough, so I'm stubborn enough. So we'll be doing this. But I'm staying with the idea that money is essential. The other thing about the combating again that fake news, as I've said earlier, I don't believe in combating fake news. Of course, sometimes even we do react to the stories which are based on, let's say, fake news. As all the world does. I mean, the situation with a Russian girl in Germany, you do remember the thing of Russia Today, yep. Again, about the boy being crucified in Ukraine by Maidan nationals and so on and so forth. We once had a situation in our country, then we were awaiting the dislocation of German troops as a deterrence measure for we were fearing about the Russian invasion. Russians were doing war games on our border, so the Germans were coming, a German division. And days before its arrival, the news were spread that German soldiers are already here and they raped a girl in Lithuania. But our state security institutions and police involved, it was very quickly identified that the news were written from the server somewhere outside the country. Of course, it was Russian server and so on and so forth. So the news, it didn't make news. I mean that all the media reported about the attempt of spreading of fake news. And of course, in this case, we reported this and we analyzed why this is being done and so on and so forth. But as I've said, I don't believe in combating in primitive way of misinformation because Russians are playing without any rules. If you want to combat it, you should play without rules. But we are different kind of people. We want to live and to work according to the rules. So we cannot let us, because if we'll start behaving like Russians are doing, will we be better than them? Of course not. So let's not do the same thing as Russians are doing. And again, to produce a fake news for Russian troll, what does it take? 10 minutes, 15 minutes if it's written one. 2 hours if it's video. So, but if you want to bust it, you should spend sometimes a week on this. Well, you will be doing this, will produce thousands of new fake news. So I don't think so. But of course, the essential thing in everything is education. If you're an educated person, media education including, you'll be irresistible. You'll resist the attempts to indoctrinate you with fake news. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. I saw Andrei wanted to say something. We are already 8 minutes late into the break, but I think people are interested in spiritual food rather than coffee and nicotine. But I also don't want to deprive them of this, so please keep that in mind. And maybe just very short comment to Adrius. Education for sure. I mean, fully agreed. The question, I guess, was whether PSM should actually play more active role in this education. But we don't have to open that chapter, we can discuss it over the break. Andrei first, then Solvita, but please, 1 minute.
Very shortly. What else than money? Answer is pluralism. Mr. Kurski, my favorite guy at Polish TV, the head of, he gave an interview and he said that you have to understand the pluralism, which is a requirement, legal requirement for the Polish public media, more broader. We have pluralism on the Polish market. And that's enough. We are with the government, they are against, there is pluralism. He's mad, he's not following the law, but he's saying the truth, fortunately. So, I disagree that private broadcasters are not, cannot do really something valuable in the terms of news. In Poland, TVN, American company, and Polsat, Polish company, they are really competing with TVP, and they are really winning this competition. It's not difficult with this kind of news. But I think, and this is another story, maybe we will talk about it after the break, the role of the national broadcasting councils, yes. When you are being given the license, you have certain requirements in the license, and usually you are offering also news. And the regulators should keep an eye on quality of news, and quality of news is not only features. However, people like features, we know all of that. But so pluralism is the answer.
Last word.
And very shortly, professional organizations for journalists, Russian language journalists are not participating in these organizations. The next one, qualitative journalism as a value. Another one, search engines. We have to understand how to win search engines. Maybe it is not possible to win bots and trolls without creating your own bots and trolls. And the same is for sponsor content. And the last one, a Russian administration works hard with young leaders. And we do not have programs for Russian language journalists. At least in Latvia. I know that Estonians do, but we don't. You have only in EHUM, European Humanitarian University, this program for Russian language journalists.
Great. Thank you very much. First of all, big thanks to all panelists for excellent presentations. Thank you to the rest of people here, I mean, for your very active participation. I'm being told that we can still have a 15-minute break, and then so we resume at 3:45 for the last session. Thank you.